What if the outcome of World War II had been different? I mean, it's one of history's most chilling what-ifs, right? And when you really start to dig into it, you see just how fragile the world we know today really is.
You know, the Allied victory, it wasn't just about changing borders on a map. It shaped everything. The global economy, the UN, even the phone in your pocket. So, what happens if we follow a timeline where that victory never happened? We're about to explore one of those possibilities. A world completely and utterly remade.
Okay, so how does a nightmare like this even begin? Well, it starts with the Third Reich not just winning a few key battles, but actually managing to consolidate total control over Europe. I want you to picture the entire continent sealed off, like an impenetrable fortress, making any kind of Allied counterattack just impossible.
In this world, any hint of opposition gets stamped out, and fast. And not just with soldiers. We're talking about starvation tactics. Resistance movements would be met with overwhelming force, sure, but also by cutting off food and supplies, and with these brutal reprisals against entire towns for the actions of just a few people.
A Nazi victory wouldn't have just been a military win. That was just step one. The real goal was to completely reinvent society from the ground up, all based on this horrific, pseudo-scientific ideology. This was the foundation for, well, for everything they did.
And right at the very top of this New World Order, the concept of the Aryan, the supposed peak of humanity. According to their doctrine, people of pure Germanic heritage weren't just better. They had a destiny, a right, to rule over everybody else. And this slide really lays out just how rigid and brutal that system was. It wasn't just Germans on top and everyone else on the bottom. Oh no, it was a detailed, horrible hierarchy. You had Western Europeans who were seen as inferior, but, acceptable. Mediterraneans were dismissed as lazy. And then you get to the bottom. Those they labeled Untermensch, subhumans, which was mainly Slavic peoples and Jews. And their fate was simple: slavery and eventually total extermination.
This whole ideology was built on one core, terrifying concept called Lebensraum, or living space, and the idea was horrifyingly simple. Eastern Europe had to be cleared out, emptied, to make room for German colonists. This was never about subjugation, it was about annihilation.
And to achieve that living space, Hitler's plans called for the systematic murder of over 50 million people. Let that number sink in. Poles, Russians, Ukrainians, entire populations targeted for death by starvation and extermination squads. The scale of it is it's almost impossible to wrap your head around.
So, what would it actually be like to live in this world? I mean, day to day, how would this ideology shape the lives of just regular people?
Well, education would be completely transformed. It wouldn't be about enlightening people, it would be about indoctrinating them. Critical thinking? Gone, replaced with pure racial ideology. Science and the humanities would be twisted to serve this one single narrative of Aryan destiny. And for young men, life would basically be a one-way ticket to military service.
And technology as we know it? Forget about it. Think about it for a second. Any invention that lets people connect freely, that allows for the free exchange of ideas, the internet, cell phones, it would be stamped out before it even got started. The state would control all information. Radio and TV would be pure propaganda, and they would never ever allow a technology that could challenge their power.
And the result of all this? Generations of fanatical young people who have never known anything else. They'd be praised just for being born Aryan, and they'd be taught from the moment they could walk that violence against so-called undesirables isn't just okay, it's a celebrated duty.
So with Europe now this single, monstrous fascist bloc, the whole global game changes. The world wouldn't be at peace? Not at all. It would be locked in this permanent, incredibly tense standoff.
And that leaves one major power still standing: the United States. Britain has fallen, the Soviets are shattered, America would suddenly find itself totally alone, facing this hostile, gigantic superpower across the Atlantic. So what would they do?
Hitler would have a massive choice to make. He could risk a devastating war across the ocean, one that would almost certainly go nuclear. Or he could choose a fragile, tense peace. The scenario that our sources lay out is that he chooses that second path, kicking off a brand new, terrifying kind of Cold War. And so begins this new global standoff. A Cold War, yeah, but so much darker than the one we had in our timeline. In this version of events, the British royal family is living in exile in Canada. They're basically a government in exile, still recognized and supported by the US, which creates this constant point of tension right on the border.
But the most profound change here isn't about geopolitics or armies. It's about ideas. It's about what happens when an idea, no matter how monstrous, actually wins.
Okay, the source material here makes a really jarring comparison, but it's important to understand why. It's not about equating these people morally, not at all. It's about explaining a powerful historical mechanism. What happens when a founding ideology is cemented by victory? The process of creating that national myth is, well, it's chillingly similar. Because victory changes everything. It turns Hitler from a failed, monstrous dictator into a revered founder. His horrific ideology, now backed by military success and economic stability, becomes the bedrock of a new civilization. The atrocities get reframed as necessary founding myths, and the whole sick ideology becomes normalized for every generation that follows.
And that really leaves us with the final haunting question, doesn't it? This whole thought experiment, it isn't just about who wins a war. It's about which ideas are allowed to survive, which truths get set in stone, and ultimately how those ideas go on to shape the very meaning of what it is to be human.